So let me take you back. If I recall, last time I talked to you years and years ago, and you were telling me the story about getting into the industry. You came out of the Navy, right? Your father had the shop, right? Tell me that story about that. Were you planning on coming back and working for him? Is that the plan
Well,
all along?
I went into the Navy. I was selected for the Nuclear Propulsion Program in submarines,
Mm, mm,
and somehow they took me. And I went through all the training, which involved the nuclear power school, which is I'm told it's the equivalent of a master's degree in 7 months. It was
wow.
brutal. It
Mm,
was classes 8 hours a day for 6 months with
mm,
multiple exams. Then we went to prototype and we actually operated and qualified on an operating land-based nuclear propulsion plant. I qualified on the Nautilus prototype, the same prototype that was used and ultimately went into the USS Nautilus. From
mm.
there, we went to sub school, and then we went to a submarine, and you start to qualify all over again on a submarine. And it takes about 2 years on a submarine to become qualified and given you earn the right to wear the dolphins of the U.S. Submarine Force.
Mm.
So I learned an awful lot in the nuclear Navy, and the man who ran the program, Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear Navy, he's between him and my father are the two people who've had the most impact on my professional life. And
Mm.
there was an awful lot of pressure on me to stay in the Navy because they had invested many dollars in these heads. And my dad had that small company here in Milwaukee, and he put pressure on me. And I always wanted to work with my dad. I really did. And so I made the decision to come home. And one of my proudest things is I say I had the privilege to work with my dad for 16 years, and we still remain friends after 16 years. So that turned out pretty well. My dad, when he got out of high school in 1938, he answered an ad in the newspaper, Milwaukee newspaper, and he got a job at A. Werner Silversmiths. And Adolf Werner was a German immigrant. He immigrated to Milwaukee, as best I can tell, about 1870, 1875. And so when my dad worked for him, he was an old man. He was in his late 70s or early 80s. And Werner Silversmith, they did restoration of silver articles, hollowware, flatware. If you remember, turn of the century, a lot of people
Mhm.
ate the silver sets. And they did church work. So my dad got a little bit of an indoctrination into plating on precious metals. The war came, my dad went away to war, came home, and asked for his job back, and he was given his job back. But during the war, Adolf had passed away. So my dad was working with his son, Clarence, and he worked there for about a year and a half. And my dad and Clarence didn't get along very well. So my dad got the bright idea to go start his own business. So he took 400 of his dollars. He got $400 from his father and $400 from a third partner that he met in the industry, and they started Artistic Plating Company. He went down to Chicago. He bought a couple of items that you may recognize if you go through a museum. We had a generator, which at one point in my career I took apart and scrapped. He bought some rheostats and he bought some tanks. The tanks were wooden and they were
Oh.
tar lined. And he started. And he used the name artistic because it described what he was doing. You know, they were doing artistic restoration, hollowware, flatware, auto parts, hardware, that sort of thing. And they started the business 1948. And we just this year are celebrating our 75th anniversary.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
and my sons are fourth generation. So my dad and my grandfather started the business. My grandfather knew nothing about plating at all, zero. Um, And then I came along being third generation. My boys are fourth. And now on Matt's oldest son, Luke, is working in the company. I'm not sure if he's going to stay here, but while he's here, he's fifth generation.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a
That is.
huge. Rarely gets to that third. I understand from a lot of the people that talk about it. So that's great with that. And so, what year was it that you got out of the service with that?
I got out of the service 1974.
74. Okay, great.
So,
and so you came.
this year,
Yeah.
I came right here, and so this
Mm-hmm.
year is 49 years at the company, and all the Lindstedts that come here, they do everything. You get the garbage jobs, you get the polishing, you get the work in environmental, work in the lab, run lines, and yeah, from the bottom up, they've all done everything.
That's good. That's good. I remember you telling me once that, when you came back and started working for the company, and that, one of the things you did was you actually visited a few shops, or maybe I know the story you told me that you visited Milt Stevenson Sr. up at Anoplate, and he really opened the doors for you to let you come in and see how they ran their shop. And maybe that was the, back then where, shops wouldn't mind kind of, sharing ideas and sharing thoughts. But I remember you telling me that story, which I thought was great, interesting, that he actually
that was, I think, 1994. I got the bright idea to get into electroless nickel plating, and I had no idea. We had never done that. And I knew Milt from surfing, and Milt was such a congenial, warm person. You couldn't help but like Milt. And he just said, we were talking, and he said, "Oh, you want to learn something?" He says, "Fly out to my company. I'll take you around." Well, I did. And he showed me everything. I mean, absolutely no holds bar, how they ran the tanks, how they masked for it, et cetera, et cetera. And that gave me enough confidence to start electroless nickel plating. And you're right. In my career, in the early part of my career in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was really a camaraderie among people in the industry. And most of our industry, if you think about it historically, has been family businesses all over the country. And same way here in Milwaukee, we've got the Malashevskis at Reliable Plating. We had the Weisses at Acme Plating. We got Alan Henry at Chrome Tech, the Matacatis at Milwaukee Plating, all families. And the families, the seniors, the kids, the grandkids. It's very different.
Right. Yeah. One thing early on, you got very involved in the association and the industry, and I know over the years I've learned that you did a lot of work, especially with environmental issues. You did a lot of research to really where there wasn't a lot of research. That people were accusing the industry of doing a lot of bad things, and I know that you kind of rolled up your sleeves and did a lot of research and worked with the EPA and did a lot of things to really show where the industry was and how it was actually, becoming more environmentally friendly with things. That was a lot of work and a lot of time and effort that you put into that, didn't you?
Well, I sure did. What you're talking about probably encompassed about 40 years of my career. And I served for 30 years on the GAC. And I can remember the morning very clearly. I think it was late 1988. And the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District was rewriting its regulations for our industry, and they were proposing some limits. And one of the limits they were proposing was for hexavalent chromium in our discharges of 1 part per billion. 1 part per billion, 1988. And this is very early on in environmental, but it was very obvious that a part per billion was really unobtainable. It was the method detection limit for hex chrome at the time. And that got me thinking and started, and I made some phone calls, and we started a coalition in Milwaukee that I was very involved in to um, interact with the POTW here in Milwaukee. And we were ultimately able to get limits, local limits that were reasonable. Matter of fact, that paper that we're talking about, that was one of the things I wrote then. I got involved and I'm trying to figure out how do they calculate detection and how do you calculate quantitation and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I've done, and I've done it twice, when this was starting, like you said, the regulators thought that all their problems, or the major part of their problems, more correctly, was this industry. So I got the idea. I said, well, why don't we calculate what our industry is giving to the local POTW? So we solicited all their records. We got numbers of all their influent of all the analytes, and then we had, if you remember, uh, by 1985 is when we had to turn on our systems in this industry to control our discharges of categorical pollutants. So we had a number of years of data from all the shops in Milwaukee. We knew on this date their chrome number was this, their zinc number was that, and we knew the flow. So we calculated all the poundages of metal from our industry from every shop. And we also knew what the district was getting in every day because they analyzed for all these metals every day with their flows. So we could calculate the concentration, the flows, both at the POTW and us, and we compared them. And lo and behold, that the amount of metals that the industry was contributing to the POTW in Milwaukee was anywhere from 5 to 15%. The worst number I remember was nickel. I have the study in my drawer yet. And so let's take a crude average. We only contribute about 10% of their loadings. So that was really an eye opener for them and for us. And we were ultimately able to negotiate something that was reasonable. Now, if you fast forward to 2014, the US EPA was thinking of redoing our effluent guidelines. And they're required to do that by law. Look at the numbers, I think, every 10 years or something. You know, they somewhere in their pile of papers it tells them how often they have to do that. And so we were really concerned as an industry they were going to ratchet down our numbers severely. So working through the GAC and with the policy group, I said, hey, I've got this data in Milwaukee from 1989. Why don't we do it again and compare the numbers? So we did. The second time, the government activities through donations from all of our members paid for the work to gather the data. And it was not a small amount of money. It takes quite a while to grind all these numbers. And we just mirrored the study, and for all the categorical pollutants, the zinc and the coppers and the nickels, blah, blah, blah. And we found out that from 1989 to 2014, the industry in Milwaukee had reduced its metal loading by 95%. So in 20, the average number of pounds per day was about 1% or 1.5%. I mean, it just jumped off the page and said, hey, we've done a good job as an industry. We really have. And I remember Christian had me go out to DC and I gave a couple presentations behind closed doors at the EPA, and it impressed them. And I have to say that they listened, and they decided we really didn't need to do that. And so two things I'm pretty proud of, and it was it wasn't rocket science. It's just ask the question, well, how much do we really contribute to these entities? And what you find out is that the vast, vast, vast majority of the metals that they get in comes basically from the large metro areas. Oil and grease dropping out of cars, and homes with copper pipes and zinc plated gutters, and there's no regulation on those folks at all.
Right.
So, and so we did a good job as an industry.
But I was going to say that was fantastic, and I know that it really sort of kept the wolves at the door a little bit longer. I know that.
And one of the things that we've always done as an industry, when we go to the agency, we say, if there's a need and you can prove to us that there's a problem, and if the techniques are available economically to respond, the industry will respond. But we're only going to respond to data. We're not going to respond to perceptions or political expediencies. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that in the PFAS problem right now. A lot of it is perception and political expediency for political gain. It's sad, and it's such
not
a
science
problem. It's not science, no.
Right.
It really is.
Right. Yeah, yeah, it has been with that. And it's funny, like you said, while you were doing this, still running your company, I know that you all made a switch to actually, for years you all were known as Artistic Plating, and then you changed the name to Advanced Plating, I think, to more reflect. And I think that was right around the time that Matt came in, right? I remember, and I know that if I recall, you guys had put more of a. I remember talking to Matt. You guys had put more of a focus on who you were going to go after as customers. I remember him telling me that you and he and all of them had made a decision. You weren't going to go after work that could be easily shipped overseas, right? And lose that. And that was really a change in how you all were going to do business, which has really helped you a lot, hasn't it?
It really has. For when we got into, we were a job shop doing normal job shop articles, and then we started very slowly to get into industrial work. We did some initial industrial plating for the Kohler Company and for this little small Milwaukee company called Square D. And it slowly grew over time. So we had a pretty good base in power distribution. And Milwaukee is the historical center of switchgear in the country. Cutler Hammer, Allen Bradley, GE, Square D, these are all Milwaukee companies. So we did a lot of that work, but we did also a very large amount of high-end decorative plating for the plumbing industry. And they started to go offshore. And it really started to hurt us. At one point, about 65% of our business was in decorative plumbing. And I would get so frustrated with it because it was very hard to quantify what they determined to be an acceptable or unacceptable product. And I remember one day, Matt and I were sitting around and we were complaining, and Matt came here from the Air Force. He's a vet. All my sons are vets. I'm a vet. And he started to say, Dad, I get a number of people that call me and they say, I found you guys 2 years ago or 3 years ago on the internet, but I didn't call you because I didn't need decorative plating. I needed technical plating. And we said, well, Lordy, if that's who we know about, how many people are out there that had that same thought process that we didn't know about? And I had always been amazed at American manufacturing, that so many companies make very wonderful products, really good widgets, but they have very little knowledge of surface finishing and how it impacts their products. And particularly from a corrosion standpoint, electrical people get it. You got to have silver and tin and those sorts of things, but how many times have I seen two dissimilar metals jammed together on something and it corrodes and they come and they say, well, look what happened. And I go, well, yes, it's pretty obvious as to why. So we decided that what we really wanted to do was we were tired of the decorative charade, the non quantifiable part of doing decorative finishing. And we were going to sell surface finishing engineering to these companies that didn't have a good grasp on it. Do you remember a gentleman by the name of Ron Mick?
I do recall the name. Yes.
Okay, well,
Yes.
Ron worked at Eaton Corporation, and
Hmm.
Ron is the only person in my 49-year career that worked for a large company that had a surface finishing engineer in-house. That was Ron Mick. And
Hmm.
Ron was great, very knowledgeable. If you want to see some really good metal finishing specs, go read Eaton specs. Ron wrote them.
Hmm.
And that's the only one. And I said, Matt, there's just nobody out there that understands. So we totally switched, changed the name. We had to change our entire customer base. We had to get rid of people who did decorative plating or wanted decorative finishing, be it hardware, be it plumbing, automotive. We were not interested, and we had to put in a lot of different processes. So we decided to expand our precious metals. We put in lead and tin lead. We had electroless nickel, and we started to sell surface finishing engineering. And it was a lot harder to do than it was to say. And it took a while.
Hmm.
And, to totally change your customer base is not an easy thing. And fortunately, we've, I think, pretty successful doing that now. We do a very large number of precious metals. We built 2 new silver plating lines in the last couple of years. Um, we have more than tripled the amount of precious metals that we purchased to deposit. And we do a lot of lead, tin lead, a lot of electroless nickel. And it's all based on engineering queries, if you will. And the most satisfying part that I think we see is that some of our existing customers now, when they're going to build a new widget, they'll call us and they'll say, what do you think? Should we use this metal or should we use this finish or which finish and which, excuse me, if you're looking at all the specs and they got A, B, and C and they don't know which one to grab. And so we ask the logical questions. What does this got to do? Where's the point of interest? Where does it actually function? How many life cycles does it need, et cetera, et cetera. And it's been very successful. And Matt has done a nice job looking for engineering problems. And James, who runs our engineering department, he does an awful lot of work when we get a new part in or a prototype, and we'll figure out how we think we want to finish it, and we'll run it that way. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. So then we go through a lot of iterations of this and that, and James spends a ton of time out in the plant doing that, and that can be a very, very frustrating exercise at times. But
Right.
yeah, overall, it's been quite good, and that's what we say. We're a surface finishing engineering firm. We're not a plater, and don't come to me and say, let's go golfing and try and nickel and dime me to get plating for half a cent a pound cheaper. We're just not interested. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say that's very interesting that what you say about that, and it's like I said, pretty gutsy, right? Pretty smart. All those and luck, all that stuff moved into one, right? I think
it's
smarts
it's
and
it's got to all roll together. And when we had a devastating fire in '96, and we burned our plating building literally to the ground. And Dad and I decided to rebuild the company, which required borrowing a lot of extra money beyond the insurance. And I learned in that I don't call the shots. God does. And I turned the whole company over to him and I said, I was getting worn out and I was getting confused as to what to do. It was just a horrible time. And I finally figured it out that I had to trust him. And I went to bed one night and I said, okay, God, you're in charge. I'm going to work tomorrow. If you want this company to succeed, make it succeed. You want it to fail, make it fail. You're driving the bus, I'll get in the bus. So, and that was a real important time for me, that 96, 97 time frame. And kind of changing over our marketing strategy. It's the same thing. You want it to succeed, make it. I'll come to work. See what happens.
Right.
It's been a fun ride.
Well, I was going to say 75 years and 5 generations. You can't beat that. That's the American story right there, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it happens. Sometimes it doesn't. But you do learn that nothing lasts forever, right, Tim?
That's right.